You've just entered Whispersden, a place where silence speaks, and the rain remembers. Before we begin, take a moment to tap like and subscribe to the den. If you enjoy rainy night horror stories whispered into the dark, you're exactly where you need to be. Now, close your eyes, slow your breath, and listen, because what you're about to hear are true horror stories. Some were buried in forgotten posts, others shared in hushed voices, and a few have never been told until now. Each one begins quietly. A normal evening, a quiet house, until something feels off. A knock at the door, a shadow in the hallway, a whisper from a room that should be empty. But you're safe here. Let the sound of the rain wrap around you, and let these stories take you under. If anything strange has ever happened to you, a flicker in the corner of your eye, a voice that didn't belong, or a night you still think about, tell us in the comments. We're always listening, and your story might be the next one we whisper here in Whispersden. Now, don't open the window. Don't answer the knock. Just stay still and keep listening. Welcome to your nightmares. Story 1, The House That Followed Me. I was 7 the first time I saw the house. Not a house I lived in. Not a house on our street. A house that didn't belong. It was winter break. My mom had taken me to visit my grandfather in a quiet, wooded town called Ash Grove, the sort of place where everything feels hushed, even in daylight. He lived alone in a small cabin at the edge of a long gravel road, surrounded by pine trees and a heavy sense of stillness. The day we arrived, I saw it from the back seat of the car. A house, tucked into the woods. Old, crooked, tilted like it had been sinking into the earth for years. It sat maybe 50 yards off the road, but no driveway led to it. No mailbox. No windows in front, just a door. Pitch black wood, like it had been burned. I asked my mom, "Who lives there?" She looked out the window, then turned back to me with a strange expression, like she was trying to see if I was joking. "There's nothing there, sweetie." That was the first time. That night, I dreamed of the house. Not in an obvious way. Not like a nightmare. It was just there. In the corner of every dream. Even when I dreamed of being at school, I'd see it through the classroom windows, across the street, sitting completely still. Waiting. When I woke up the next morning, the house was gone from the woods. I looked for it every day we stayed at Grandpa's. Nothing. Just trees. I stopped talking about it. Kids forget things. Until I saw it again. I was 10 when it showed up in our neighborhood. 3 years later. Hundreds of miles away. New state. New house. My mom had just gotten remarried, and we'd moved to a suburban cul-de-sac with trimmed lawns and friendly neighbors. One evening, I was riding my bike home when I saw it at the far end of the block. Same black wood. Same windowless front. No driveway. No porch. Just a crooked, silent house that didn't belong. I stood there on my bike, staring. Long enough for my stepdad to come out and yell for dinner. I looked away. And when I looked back, it wasn't there. I started seeing it more after that. Once every year or so. Always in places it shouldn't be. Once behind a gas station in Missouri while we were on a road trip. Once on a hilltop across from a motel. Once reflected in a puddle on a sidewalk in town, even though it wasn't really there. Each time it got closer. I know how that sounds, but that's the only way I can explain it. It wasn't following me. It wasn't chasing. It was approaching. By the time I was 15, I'd stopped mentioning it. There's only so many times you can say, "Do you see that house?" before people start asking if you need help. I got used to pretending it wasn't there. I got used to its shape in the corner of my eye. Until the night it moved. It was summer. Late July. I'd fallen asleep with the window open because the AC was broken. The hum of cicadas and a distant dog bark lulled me into the half-dream state where nothing feels real. That's when I heard the creak. A slow, heavy groan of rotting wood shifting its weight. It came from across the street. I got out of bed, moved to the window. The house was sitting there, across the road, where the Johnsons' front lawn should have been. Only this time, the door was open. Not wide, just a crack. Enough to see the blackness inside wasn't empty, it was moving. Like something was breathing in there. The next morning, the Johnsons were outside watering their lawn like nothing had happened. No house. No marks on the grass. No sign that anything had stood there at all. I thought I'd imagined it. I wanted to believe I had. Until I checked my phone. In my camera roll, a photo I don't remember taking. A picture of the house. From my bedroom window. Door cracked open. In the corner of the frame, near the door, was something else. Just a shape. Not fully visible, but unmistakably human. Watching. I didn't sleep for days after that. And when I finally did, I dreamt I was inside it. Not walking in. Not being dragged in. Just already there. The house didn't have rooms. Just endless narrow hallways. No lights. No doors. Just walls and corners and the sound of wood stretching. But in every turn, I felt like I had just missed something. Like someone was always just ahead of me. Walking slower. Leading me deeper. It's been years now. I've moved to cities. Lived in buildings. Spent nights in crowded apartments with locked doors and bright hallways. But I still see it. Once, it was across the street from my office in broad daylight. Another time, it was reflected in a bus window, only for a second. I've tried everything. Therapy. Medication. Even hypnosis. Nothing changes the fact that it shows up. And each time, it's closer. Last night, I woke up to a sound I haven't heard since I was 15. A creak. Heavy. Slow. Right outside my window. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. But I knew what I'd see if I opened the curtain. Not the whole house this time. Just the door. Standing there alone on the sidewalk. Slightly open. And something inside, waiting. Story 2, the reflection in the hallway. When I was 12, my parents bought an old Victorian house on the outskirts of town. It was the kind of place that felt like it had secrets just waiting to spill, but my parents thought it was a bargain and a fresh start for us. The house was beautiful in the daylight. Towering ceilings, ornate woodwork, and wide hallways lined with old mirrors. That's where it started. The first night I slept there, I woke up around 3 in the morning. The kind of half-awake, half-dream state where everything is blurry but you can still feel something pressing on your chest. I blinked into the darkness and saw it. A reflection. Not in my bedroom mirror, but in the long hallway mirror that ran along the wall just outside my door. It showed a faint silhouette standing still at the far end. But when I looked over my shoulder, There was no one there. I told myself it was a trick of the light. But every night after that, the reflection was there. Sometimes it was just a shadow. Other times, a figure, tall, thin, always still. Not once did it move toward me. It just stood, watching. I started avoiding the hallway. I took detours through other rooms. Sometimes, I even slept with the door closed and a book blocking the gap. One night, curiosity finally got the better of me. I got out of bed, wrapped in my blanket, and crept to the door. The hallway was dark except for the faint moonlight reflecting off the mirror. I stood there, staring at the reflection. And it stared back. Only this time, it wasn't alone. Behind the tall figure, I saw two eyes. Small, bright, watching. And then the figure smiled. The smile wasn't warm. It wasn't human. It stretched wide, impossibly wide, as if the shadows themselves had teeth. I jumped back, heart pounding, but when I turned on the hallway light, nothing. The next day, I begged my parents to get rid of the mirrors. They laughed it off. Old houses have mirrors, my mom said. It's just the way the light falls at night. But I knew it was something else. Something that used the mirrors like windows. That night, I covered every mirror I could find, every reflective surface, from the hallway to the bathroom, even the framed pictures with glass fronts. It made the house feel smaller, constricted. But I slept. Until the morning. In the early dawn light, I woke to a sound like slow footsteps. But the house was empty. I felt a cold breeze, but all the windows were shut. And then I saw it. The hallway mirror. Uncovered. Standing tall, perfectly clear. And in it, the reflection. But not just one figure this time. Multiple shadows crowded the glass, pressing close. Watching. Waiting. I ran to my parents' room. This house isn't safe, I told them. They didn't believe me. But I knew I had to leave. Years later, when I came back to collect my things, the house was abandoned. Windows boarded up. Paint peeling. But the hallway mirror was still there. And if you stood just right, you could see a faint, pale smile lurking in its depths. Story 3, The Night Caller. It started on a quiet summer night when I was 17. I had just moved into my own apartment, a small second-floor unit above a convenience store in a town where nothing much ever happened. The kind of place where the loudest noise is usually a dog barking or the occasional car passing by. That night, I was lying in bed scrolling on my phone when my landline rang. I didn't have caller ID on that line, so I hesitated before answering. But curiosity won. Hello? Silence. No breath. No sound. Just silence. I hung up. Then, exactly 1 minute later, it rang again. This time, I didn't answer. The calls kept coming. Night after night. 2, 3, sometimes 5 calls in a row, always silent. One evening, I finally picked up again. And this time, I heard something faint. Almost like a whisper, but too quiet to make out. I asked, "Who is this?" Still nothing. But then, a voice, barely audible, said, "You're not alone." Then the line went dead. I told my friends. They joked it was a prank. But I wasn't so sure. A few nights later, the calls started changing. They came earlier, before I was even home. Sometimes the voice would speak again. "Watch the mirror," it said once. "Behind you," it whispered another night. I lived alone. No one had a key. No one should have been in the apartment. One night, I woke to the phone ringing. I answered. The voice said, "Look." I turned slowly toward the bedroom mirror. At first, I saw nothing. Then, behind me reflected in the glass, a shadow. Tall. Thin. Standing just inches away. I spun around. Nothing. The call stopped the next day. But I still sleep with my back to the wall. And sometimes, just before I drift off, I swear I hear my phone ringing again. Story 4, the locked room upstairs. When I was a kid, my grandparents had an old house that seemed like it belonged in a storybook, peeling white paint, a creaky porch, and an attic that smelled like dust and forgotten memories. The thing about that house was the locked room upstairs. Nobody talked about it much. Not my grandparents. Not my parents. But everyone seemed to tiptoe around it. I was maybe 9 years old the first time I noticed the door. It was at the end of the hallway, plain, old wood, with a rusted iron keyhole. The key was long gone, or so they said. One rainy afternoon, when the rest of the family was busy downstairs, I found an old hairpin in my grandmother's sewing basket. Curious, I decided to see if I could unlock that door. I remember how quiet the house was, even with the rain pounding on the roof. The hairpin slipped into the lock, and after what felt like forever, a soft click echoed. I pushed the door open slowly. The room was pitch dark, the air thick and cold. I could barely make out the shape of old furniture covered in white sheets. But then, something caught my eye. A mirror. The mirror stood alone in the middle of the room, tall and ornate, its glass dusty but not cracked. I stepped closer. My reflection was there, but behind me, in the glass, I saw movement. A figure. A woman, pale and silent, standing just beyond my shoulder. I spun around. Nothing. The door slammed shut behind me. I screamed and tried to open it. It wouldn't budge. I pounded on the door with my fists, heart racing. After what felt like an eternity, it creaked open just enough for me to slip out. When I told my grandmother, she looked sad but said nothing. Just whispered, "Some doors are locked for a reason." Years later, I learned this story. That room had belonged to my great-aunt. She vanished without a trace. Some say she still roams the house, trapped between worlds, watching through that mirror. Now, every time it rains and the wind howls, I remember that locked room. And I wonder if she's still waiting for someone to find her. Story 5, the silent tenant. I remember the day I moved into the old apartment building like it was yesterday. It stood like a tired relic on the edge of town, paint peeling from its wooden frame, windows clouded with years of neglect, and an air of forgotten stories hanging heavy in the stale breeze. For a fresh college graduate like me, desperate for a place to call my own, the price was right. The landlord seemed like a man who had seen too many tenants come and go. His eyes avoided mine when he handed me the keys, and in a hushed voice, he said, "There's someone else here. Someone who doesn't like visitors." I laughed, brushing it off as an old man's superstition. The first night, the apartment was cold, colder than any place I'd ever stayed. I chalked it up to the drafty windows and ancient walls, but as I unpacked my things, an uneasy feeling settled deep in my chest. At exactly midnight, the silence was broken. I heard footsteps outside my door, soft, deliberate, pacing back and forth as though someone was waiting. I held my breath, watching through the peephole, but there was no one there. Just the dim hallway and the flickering light above. That night, I barely slept. The footsteps continued for days, and soon came knocks, slow, rhythmic, almost a pattern. At first, I convinced myself it was the neighbor's cat or a prank. But then the whispering started. Soft voices, almost unintelligible, floating through the cracks beneath the door. Help me, please. My skepticism began to crack. Who was this someone in the apartment? I tried to tell myself it was my imagination, the stress of a new life catching up to me. But every night, the knocking grew more insistent, the whispers more desperate. One evening, I returned home to find my front door unlocked. Nothing stolen. Nothing disturbed, except a note on the floor, written in shaky handwriting. Don't trust the door. I froze. Who had left it? Why? Questions spiraled in my mind. I started asking neighbors, but they seemed tight-lipped, exchanging worried glances but offering no answers. I dug through the building's rental history, learning about Clara, the tenant before me. She disappeared without a trace 6 months prior. No forwarding address. No phone calls. No emails. Just gone. My nights became restless. At 3:13 a.m. every night, the lights would flicker and a cold whisper would drift through the air. Find the key. I began searching. Behind loose bricks. Under floorboards. Inside cupboards. Days turned to weeks, and just when I was about to give up, I found it, a small, rusted key tucked inside an old coat pocket I never wore. The key fit an old door at the end of the hall, a door I hadn't dared open before. It creaked slowly, revealing a narrow staircase descending into pitch-black darkness. As I stepped down, the cold wrapped around me like a shroud. The air smelled of damp earth and forgotten sorrow. Shadows clung to the corners. At the bottom was a cellar, cluttered with dusty boxes, broken furniture, and Clara's belongings. I found a diary, its pages yellowed and fragile. Her words spilled out, fear, loneliness, a creeping terror she could never explain. She spoke of voices in the walls, shadows watching her every move, and a door she couldn't open, a door that trapped her in this nightmare. Suddenly, I felt it, a breath on my neck, cold and unnatural. I spun around, flashlight cutting through the darkness. Nothing but silence. Then, a whisper. Thank you. I left the apartment the next day. But the footsteps still echo in my dreams. Soft. Slow. Watching. Waiting. Story 6. The Last Guest. They say old hotels carry memories, some pleasant, some dark. I never believed it until I stayed at the Crestwood Inn. It was a place forgotten by time, perched on the edge of a sleepy town where fog rolled in like a living thing and swallowed the streets whole. I needed a quiet weekend away, a break from the noise of city life. But what I found inside those weathered walls was something else entirely. The Crestwood Inn looked charming from the outside. A sprawling Victorian building with ivy crawling up its sides, and windows that reflected the dying light like watchful eyes. The front desk was manned by an elderly woman with a quiet smile and a gaze that felt too sharp for her years. She handed me my key, room 217, and warned softly, "Don't listen to the whispers in the walls." I smiled politely, chalking it up to small-town superstition. The room was large but cold, with heavy curtains that blocked the setting sun and thick carpets that swallowed footsteps. I unpacked slowly, letting the silence wrap around me. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows like distant drums. As night fell, I sat by the window, watching shadows stretch and twist. The first whispers began just past midnight. Soft murmurs that seemed to come from the walls themselves. I pressed my ear to the cold plaster, straining to catch the words. They were faint, barely more than a breath. But they carried a sadness that seeped into my bones. I tried to ignore it, telling myself it was the wind. Hours later, I awoke to a sharp chill. The whispers had grown louder, more urgent. Find her, they breathed. I shivered, pulling the blanket tight. The next morning, I asked the innkeeper about the whispers. Her eyes darkened. Many years ago, she said, a guest disappeared from this room. No one knows how or why. She warned me again. Some doors are meant to stay closed. That day, I explored the inn. Hallways stretched endlessly, lined with portraits whose eyes seemed to follow. I found a locked door at the end of the corridor, one that the key wouldn't open. Behind it, I could hear the faintest sound of crying. Determined to uncover the truth, I returned to room 217 that evening. As darkness deepened, the whispers turned to voices. Pleading, begging, desperate. Suddenly, the room grew icy. The curtains fluttered though the windows were shut. I saw a figure, a woman in a faded dress, standing silently by the door. Her eyes were hollow, her lips moving but no sound escaped. Frozen, I watched as she slowly raised a hand, pointing toward the locked door down the hall. My heart pounded. I knew I had to find a way in. That night began a slow descent into a nightmare I could never have imagined. The locked door was a presence in the hallway, ominous and unexplained. My fingertips grazed the cold brass handle, but it refused to budge. I pressed my ear against the wood and caught the faintest echo of muffled sobbing, as though someone, or something, was trapped behind it. For hours that night, I lay in bed, the figure's silent pleading haunting my every thought. The inn had become a cage of quiet terror, and sleep was a distant dream. The wind whispered through the eaves, weaving into the voices that seemed to seep from the very walls, wrapping around me like a shroud. Morning came with pale light filtering through the curtains, but the heaviness remained. I felt drawn, as if the building itself was pulling me toward that door. Breakfast was a hollow affair. The innkeeper's eyes flicked toward me, filled with knowing sorrow. "You don't belong here," she said quietly. "You shouldn't have come." Curiosity wrestled with fear. I couldn't leave without understanding. That afternoon, I searched the dusty library of the inn, hoping for clues. Old newspapers, brittle pages, and faded photographs littered the shelves. I found a yellowed clipping about a woman named Evelyn, a guest who vanished from room 217 nearly 50 years ago. The article hinted at rumors, disappearances, ghostly sightings, and a curse that seemed to haunt the inn. One sentence caught my eye: guests who hear the whispers are never truly alone. Night fell again, bringing with it a deeper darkness. I lit a single candle, its flickering flame casting long shadows. The whispers grew into a chorus, voices layering in desperate harmony. "Help me, find the truth, free me." The figure appeared again, her hollow eyes begging. This time, her lips formed words I could almost hear. "Under the floor." I mustered every ounce of courage and began to search beneath the carpet. My hands trembled as I peeled back the threadbare edges, revealing a trapdoor almost invisible against the aged wood. The scent of damp earth rose as I lifted it, exposing a narrow staircase descending into pitch-black darkness. The air was cold and stale, heavy with secrets. Each step creaked beneath my feet as I descended into the unknown. The cellar was vast and silent, a crypt of forgotten memories. Boxes of old belongings lay scattered, broken furniture stacked haphazardly, and in the far corner, a faded trunk caught my eye. With shaking hands, I pried it open. Inside were letters, photographs, and a diary, Evelyn's diary. The pages were filled with frantic handwriting, each word dripping with fear and loneliness. She wrote of shadows that moved when she wasn't looking, voices that whispered her name, and a growing sense that something was watching, waiting. One entry chilled me to the core. "The door will not keep me safe. I feel it here, beneath me. The last guest is never truly free." Suddenly, the cellar grew colder still, and the shadows seemed to stretch and pulse. I turned to leave, but the trapdoor slammed shut above me, plunging me into darkness. Panic surged, but I forced myself to breathe slowly, the whispers now surrounding me. Find the key, free me. Hours passed, or maybe minutes, time lost meaning in that black void. Then, a faint glow from the diary caught my eye. A small key had fallen from its pages, ornate and ancient. I grasped it tightly, hope blooming. Back upstairs, the key fit perfectly into the locked door. As it turned, a rush of cold air and a sudden silence fell over the inn. The door swung open to reveal a narrow passage, walls lined with faded portraits, faces twisted in anguish. At the end stood Evelyn, no longer hollow-eyed, but radiant and free. She smiled softly. Thank you. The inn's oppressive weight lifted, the whispers ceased. I left the Crestwood Inn with the dawn, the sun breaking through the mist like a promise. But sometimes, when the wind is just right, I swear I can still hear a faint whisper, a grateful sigh carried on the breeze. Story 7, The Reflection in Room 9. There's an old saying that mirrors don't just reflect who we are, sometimes they show what we fear. I never thought much about it until I stayed in room 9 at the Blackwood Hotel. A place where every reflection feels wrong. The Blackwood Hotel was tucked away on the outskirts of a forgotten town, its brick facade cracked and weary from decades of storms and neglect. When I arrived, the air was thick with the scent of dust and faded memories. The receptionist handed me an old brass key with a knowing look, cautioning me about room 9. They say it shows you things you don't want to see, she whispered. But don't let it consume you. I smiled nervously, brushing off her words as mere superstition. The room was small but cozy, with antique furnishings that creaked under the weight of time. The most striking feature was a large, ornate mirror hanging opposite the bed, its surface dulled by age, yet strangely captivating. The first night, as rain pattered softly against the window, I caught a glimpse of something unusual in the mirror's reflection. A shadow that moved independently of me. I blinked, but it was still there, a dark shape lurking just behind my own image. Curious but unnerved, I turned around. Nothing. But when I looked back at the mirror, the shadow seemed to stretch and twist into a face, a pale woman with hollow eyes staring back at me. The next few nights were a torment of half-seen figures and whispered warnings. The mirror became a gateway to a world of shadows, where the line between reality and nightmare blurred. I tried covering the mirror, but the shadows seeped through cracks and corners, invading my dreams. One evening, desperate for answers, I asked the hotel's night clerk about the mirror's history. His face grew serious. Room 9 belonged to a woman named Margaret Blackwood, the hotel's last owner. They say she vanished into the mirror, lost between worlds. That night, the mirror seemed alive. I watched in horror as my reflection smiled, but I hadn't. Then, the glass rippled like water, pulling me closer. I struggled, feeling myself slipping into darkness. The room dissolved into an endless corridor lined with mirrors, each reflecting a different version of myself. Some smiled, some wept, some screamed silently. In the distance, a faint voice called my name. I chased the voice, heart pounding, until I found Margaret, trapped behind a mirror, her face etched with centuries of sorrow. She warned me, the mirror shows your fears, but also your truth. To escape, you must face yourself. Hours later, I awoke back in room 9, the dawn light soft and real. The mirror was just glass once more. But I knew some part of me stayed behind, lost in those endless reflections. Story 8, The Hollow Man of Willow Creek. There's a kind of silence in some places that isn't empty, it's heavy, suffocating, like the weight of something unseen pressing down on your chest. Willow Creek was exactly that kind of place. When I first heard about it, I thought it was just another quiet town, the kind you pass through without a second thought. But there was something about the warnings, the way people avoided speaking its name after dusk, that pulled me in, allured to uncover secrets best left buried. The town lies nestled deep in a forest where the trees grow so thick, sunlight barely touches the ground. The road in was cracked and winding, flanked by ancient oaks that twisted toward the sky like gnarled fingers. I arrived on a chill autumn evening, the kind of cold that seeps into your bones and makes you question every step. At the small inn near the town center, the air smelled of wood smoke and damp earth. The proprietor was an older man with tired eyes who barely looked at me when he handed over the key. "You're staying in room 7, yes?" he asked, voice low. I nodded. "Good. Just don't wander near the mill after dark," he said, leaning closer. "And keep away from the creek. There's a story here, one that never ends." I smiled politely, brushing off his words as local superstition. But later, as I settled into the room, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. That first night, I lay awake listening to the wind moan through the trees. Then, faint footsteps outside my window, slow, deliberate, but never quite close enough to see. Sleep was elusive. The next morning, I set out to explore, heading toward the old mill at the edge of town. It stood like a skeleton, its wooden frame rotted and half collapsed, consumed by moss and shadow. The creek beside it was narrow and sluggish, its surface glassy under a pale sun. Locals kept their distance, eyes downcast, whispering only when I passed. "The Hollow Man," one woman finally said when I asked about the place. "He's a ghost, a curse, a warning. A man who lost everything to greed and madness, now trapped between worlds." That night, curiosity got the better of me. I walked to the mill as the sun dipped behind the trees, casting long fingers of darkness across the land. The mist rose thick from the creek, swirling around my ankles as I approached. Then I saw him, the Hollow Man. He was tall, impossibly thin, wearing a long coat and a wide-brimmed hat that shadowed his face. His eyes glowed faintly red, like dying embers. He didn't move, just stood there, watching. I wanted to run, but my feet were rooted. His voice was a whisper on the wind, barely audible. "You shouldn't be here." The mist thickened, swirling into ghostly shapes, faces twisted in sorrow, hands reaching out. I stumbled back, heart pounding, breath coming in ragged gasps. When I looked again, he was gone. I spent the next days piecing together the story from old journals, town records, and whispered legends. The Hollow Man was once a mill owner named Thomas Gray, a man consumed by ambition. He had made a deal, a bargain that promised wealth but demanded a terrible price. One stormy night, the mill caught fire. Some say Thomas was trapped inside, his soul forever bound to the place. Others believe he was never human to begin with, a shadow cast by the greed that poisoned the town. That night, the whispers returned. Soft, insistent, like the creek's endless murmur. "Help me, free me." Compelled, I returned to the mill, journal in hand. Under the moonlight, I read aloud the words of Thomas Gray, his regrets, his pain, his plea for release. The mist responded, swirling into a figure, the Hollow Man, no longer a monster, but a man broken by time. As dawn broke, the figure faded, leaving behind a silence filled with relief. The town seemed lighter, the oppressive weight lifted. I left Willow Creek with the journal, knowing some stories aren't just tales, they are warnings, echoes of lives tangled in shadow. If you've ever felt the pull of a place that shouldn't hold you, maybe you understand the Hollow Man's sorrow. And maybe, just maybe, some shadows are waiting for you to set them free. Story 9, The Last Caller. It was a night like any other, the kind of quiet night when the world seems to hold its breath, waiting for something, anything, to break the silence. I worked the late shift at a small call center on the outskirts of town, where the flicker of fluorescent lights and the hum of computers were my only companions. It was a dull, lonely job, but it paid the bills, and sometimes, on nights like this, I welcomed the solitude. The phones rang sporadically, mostly wrong numbers, hang-ups, or telemarketers, nothing worth remembering. That is, until the clock struck midnight. The phone on my desk vibrated sharply, cutting through the stillness like a sudden scream. I answered, expecting another prank or accidental dial. But the voice on the other end was different, low, calm, and oddly distant. "Hello," the caller whispered. There was a pause, a quiet tension that stretched too long before I found my voice. "Hello? This is the night shift. How can I help you?" The line was silent for a moment, then the voice spoke again, clear this time, but still cold and hollow. "I need you to listen carefully." I frowned, curiosity creeping into my tone. "I'm listening." The caller began to tell a story, slow and deliberate, weaving a tale that felt both intimate and otherworldly. He spoke of a house at the end of a forgotten street, where shadows lived and memories were prisoners. He described a woman who vanished one stormy night, leaving behind nothing but silence and sorrow. His voice trembled as he recounted the details, the creaking floors, the cold drafts, the soft footsteps that echoed when no one was there. It was like listening to a ghost confess its own tragedy. As he spoke, a chill crept up my spine. The air in the room seemed to grow colder, the shadows deeper. The story was compelling, haunting, but there was something else, something unsettling lurking beneath the words. He wasn't just telling a story. He was warning me. Suddenly, static crackled through the line. The voice faltered, became distorted, as if struggling to break free from some unseen force. "Don't stay." Then silence. I sat frozen, the phone heavy in my hand. The seconds stretched into minutes, the oppressive quiet swallowing the room. I stared at the receiver, half expecting the voice to return, to continue the story, to explain the warning. But it never did. Over the next few days, I couldn't shake the call from my mind. The stranger's words haunted me, replaying endlessly as if etched into my brain. It was more than a story. It felt like a message, a plea or a warning from beyond. Driven by a mix of dread and curiosity, I began to research the house, the street, the vanished woman. I found old newspaper clippings buried in online archives, faded photographs of a dilapidated home on a street no longer on modern maps. Her name was Evelyn Harper. Evelyn had been a local artist, known for painting eerie landscapes that captured the essence of decay and loneliness. One stormy night, decades ago, she disappeared without a trace. No clues. No suspects. Just silence. Locals whispered her curses, of the house being haunted by something restless and angry. One evening, armed with a flashlight and the caller's cryptic description, I found myself standing at the edge of a narrow, overgrown path that led to the house. The street was abandoned, swallowed by nature's relentless march. The house loomed ahead, its boarded windows like dark, watching eyes. Vines strangled its walls, and the door hung slightly ajar, creaking softly in the breeze. My heart thumped, but I stepped forward. Inside, the air was thick with dust and something else, a heaviness that pressed on my chest, making each breath shallow. I wandered through rooms frozen in time, broken furniture, cracked walls, faded wallpaper peeling like dead skin. In the living room, a dusty easel stood next to a shattered window. On the floor lay scattered papers, sketches and half-finished paintings, all haunting, all echoing the same scene, a dark figure lurking just beyond the trees. Then, a sudden noise, a whisper, echoed from the shadows. I froze, barely daring to breathe. "Don't stay." The voice was soft, almost pleading. I spun toward the sound but found only emptiness. My flashlight flickered, then went out, plunging me into darkness. Panic rose, but I forced myself to calm down, pulling out my phone's light. The room was empty, but the air pulsed with a presence, cold, watching. I retraced my steps to the front door and froze. Footsteps. Slow. Heavy. Coming from the floor above. I wasn't alone. The house groaned under the weight of unseen footsteps, growing louder, closer. I backed into a corner, heart hammering. Then, a shadow materialized at the staircase, tall, thin, featureless except for hollow, glowing eyes. The hollow collar. I don't remember running out of the house, but I found myself outside, gasping for air, heart racing. The house stood silent behind me, as if nothing had happened. That night, I knew the story wasn't over, it had only begun. Since then, strange calls have come to my phone at midnight, faint whispers, chilling warnings. The line sometimes crackles with static, sometimes with that same hollow voice, always urging me, don't stay. I don't know what waits on that forgotten street. But I do know this, some calls are never meant to be answered, and some stories refuse to end. If you've ever received a call that chilled you to your core, or felt a presence lingering just beyond the edge of your senses, you know the truth. Sometimes, the last caller isn't a person at all, but something else, something ancient, something waiting. Story 10, The Echoes and the Static. I've spent years working nights, alone, surrounded by the constant hum and crackle of electronics, radios, old telephones, static-filled speakers. There's a strange comfort in the white noise. It fills the silence, masks the loneliness, creates a world where sound is a blanket. One night, as rain tapped gently against my window, the old shortwave radio in my cluttered apartment crackled to life on its own. The dial hadn't moved, I hadn't touched it. But the static was gone, replaced by something else, a voice. A voice, barely above a whisper, speaking my name. At first, I thought it was some prank, or maybe a glitch. After all, radios can pick up stray signals from faraway places. But the voice wasn't random. It spoke in slow, careful words, as if telling me a story meant only for me. It spoke of memories I never shared, moments from childhood I barely remembered, places I never visited, and secrets I didn't know I held. Each night, the voice returned, telling more fragments of a story that felt like it was stitched together from the very fabric of my life, yet twisted, warped, and distorted. I started to realize something terrifying. The voice was unraveling my past, revealing events I thought were forgotten. But some memories it spoke of, they weren't mine. They belonged to someone else, someone I never met. Then the line between my memories and the voice's story blurred. I began to question what was real and what was echo. The voice warned me, not with threats, but with cryptic hints of a presence stalking the spaces between moments, a shadow that lives in forgotten echoes. One night, the voice said, "You will forget. But it won't forget you." From that moment, my world fractured. Objects moved when I wasn't looking. Shadows shifted with a will of their own. And the static on my radio became a thin veil between reality and something else. I realized the radio was more than just an old device. It was a doorway, a fragile bridge between lives, memories, and echoes that refused to die. The voice belonged to an echo, a consciousness trapped in the static, trying to reach out, to be heard, to be remembered. But the question is, why me? And what happens when the echo finds a place to live? As days turned into restless nights, I felt myself slipping, losing grip on who I was, merging with the fragments of another life tangled in that haunting voice. The final warning came in a whisper: if you listen too long, the echo becomes you. Story 11, The Forgotten Letters. It began with a simple discovery. While cleaning out my late grandmother's attic, I found an old wooden chest, its surface worn smooth by time, locked with a rusty clasp that opened easily with a gentle twist. Inside were letters, hundreds of them, yellowed with age, tied with a faded ribbon. Each one addressed to someone I'd never heard of. At first, I thought they were just love letters from a past era, dusty remnants of a story long forgotten. But as I read, a slow chill crept over me. The letters weren't addressed to a lover, but to a stranger. And the words, they were warnings. The letters were written in a neat, careful hand, dated back to the early 1900s. They told the story of a small village, a family cursed, and a presence that moved like a shadow through the night. One letter, written by a woman named Eliza, spoke of strange noises in the house, whispers in the walls, cold drafts that no fire could warm, and the feeling of eyes watching from the dark. She begged the recipient to leave, to escape before it was too late. The tone shifted from hope to desperation as the letters continued. Eliza wrote of people disappearing in the night, of shadows that clawed at the windows, and a terrible secret buried beneath the house. Each letter grew darker, filled with fear that seeped through the fragile paper like a stain. I was drawn deeper into the mystery. The house I just inherited was the same one described in the letters. The very attic I was standing in now. That night, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. The air was heavy, thick with silence that pressed against my ears. I lit a candle and settled among the boxes, rereading the letters by flickering light. Then, faintly at first, I heard it, a soft tapping, like someone knocking from inside the walls. I froze, every instinct telling me to run, but curiosity held me rooted. The tapping grew louder, more urgent, echoing through the wood beams. Then a whisper, barely audible, something like a name, or maybe a plea. I followed the sound down the narrow attic stairs, through the house's creaking halls. It led me to the basement door, the very place Eliza had warned was the heart of the curse. The door was old, covered in dust and cobwebs. With trembling hands, I pushed it open, revealing darkness that seemed to swallow the weak light from above. A cold wave rushed out, carrying the scent of earth and something metallic, like rusted iron and old blood. Inside, I saw it, a small box, hidden beneath the floorboards, just as the letters described. Inside the box was a locket, blackened with age, and a folded piece of paper, a final letter. The letter was a confession. It spoke of a deal made long ago, a bargain with a shadowed figure who promised protection in exchange for a terrible price, the souls of those who lived in the house. Eliza's family had tried to break the curse but failed. And the shadow waited, patient and hungry, bound to the house and its bloodline. The letter warned me to leave, to never return. But I couldn't. Over the next days, strange things began happening. Lights flickered without cause. Footsteps echoed in empty rooms. Objects moved on their own, a chair overturned, a book dropped to the floor. At night, I heard whispers calling my name, soft but insistent. I saw shadows flicker just beyond the candlelight, shapes that melted into the darkness when I looked directly. Sleep became impossible. Every dream was haunted by the house's history, faces twisted in fear, voices begging for release. I tried to ignore it, but the house was alive, breathing, watching. One night, I awoke to find the locket lying on my chest. I hadn't moved, hadn't worn it to sleep. The pendant pulsed cold against my skin, like a heartbeat. A voice whispered from the shadows, "You belong to us now." Fear gripped me, but I knew I couldn't run. The house had chosen me. I'm still here, reading the letters, searching for a way out. But each page pulls me deeper into the past, and the curse. If you ever find old letters in a forgotten attic, take care. Some stories want to stay buried. Story 12, The Silent Passenger. It started as a simple road trip. I was driving through a stretch of countryside I'd never been to before, the sky painted in deep hues of twilight. The road was narrow and winding, flanked by tall trees that seemed to lean inward like silent sentinels, their branches clawing at the fading light. My phone had died hours ago, so no GPS, no way to call for help if needed. But I wasn't worried, at least, Not yet. I passed an old gas station that looked closed, boarded up years ago, but something caught my eye, a figure standing by the edge of the road. A woman. She wore a long coat, dark and heavy, and her hair was soaked from the evening mist. Instinct told me to keep going, but something about her made me slow down. I pulled over and rolled the window down. Need a ride? I asked, hoping she'd say no, but she nodded without a word, sliding silently into the passenger seat. Her presence was strange. She didn't say a word, didn't react to anything I said. She just stared straight ahead, her eyes fixed on the road as if she was looking through it. I tried to break the silence, asked her where she was headed, but she remained quiet. The atmosphere inside the car shifted, thickening like fog. The warm hum of the engine felt distant, the shadows creeping closer around us. As we drove deeper into the night, the road became worse. Potholes, cracked asphalt, twisting curves with no guardrails. The trees closed in tighter, blocking the moonlight, and I realized I was completely alone, except for her. I glanced at the passenger seat. Her face was pale, almost translucent in the faint light, and her eyes didn't blink. I swallowed hard and tried to focus on the road. Then the radio flickered on. Static crackled, followed by a faint voice, distorted, barely audible. I turned the dial, but the voice persisted, whispering words I couldn't understand. Suddenly, the woman's head turned slightly, and for the first time, she spoke. "Don't stop," she said, her voice low and chilling. I asked, "What do you mean? Where are you from?" No answer. Just a cold silence. Minutes later, the car jolted violently. I slammed on the brakes. Ahead was a bridge, old, rickety, and barely lit. The wood planks creaked under my tires. As I crossed, I saw something below the water, a figure floating, pale and still. I blinked, looked away, then back again. The figure was gone. The woman beside me leaned close and whispered, "We shouldn't have come this way." Panic set in. I wanted to stop, to turn back, but the engine sputtered and died. We were stranded on the bridge, surrounded by darkness and the eerie sound of water lapping beneath us. I reached for my phone, still dead. The woman's eyes locked onto mine, wide and unblinking. Suddenly, a cold hand gripped my arm. I screamed, but no sound came. The night stretched endlessly. I don't remember falling asleep. When I woke, the passenger seat was empty. The engine roared back to life. The sun was rising. I was alone. I never saw her again. But sometimes, when I drive alone late at night, I feel her presence, that silent passenger, watching, waiting. And I wonder, was she ever really there? Or was I just driving with a ghost? Story 13, The Clockmaker's Secret. The city was drenched in rain that evening, the kind that seeps deep into your bones and muffles all sound except the steady tapping against window panes and cobblestones. I remember walking down the deserted streets, the dim glow of street lamps casting long shadows. That's when I first saw the old clockmaker's shop. The sign above the door was faded, the paint chipped, Harmon's horology barely legible. The windows were fogged from the warmth inside. Something about the place pulled me in, a strange curiosity. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of wood polish, old metal, and something else, a faint whisper of dust and time itself. The clockmaker sat behind a cluttered workbench, his fingers deftly adjusting the tiny gears of a brass clock. His hair was silver, his skin lined with years of solitude and care. But his eyes, those eyes, were sharp and clear, like they had seen more than a lifetime's worth of seconds. I came in clutching my late grandfather's pocket watch, a family heirloom that had stopped ticking years ago. I hoped, maybe foolishly, that this man could bring it back to life. He took the watch with a slow, deliberate motion and examined it under his magnifying glass. "This is no ordinary timepiece," he said softly, his voice barely louder than the ticking in the background. "It holds a secret not meant for all." I raised an eyebrow but said nothing. The clockmaker smiled thinly, disappearing into a dim backroom, leaving me alone in the silence interrupted only by the soft ticking of hundreds of clocks. Minutes passed, though it felt like hours. My eyes wandered over the walls lined with clocks of every shape and size, grandfathers, cuckoos, wall-mounted pendulums, all ticking in haunting unison. Then he returned, holding the watch. But something was different. The glass face glowed faintly, a pale blue light pulsing like a heartbeat beneath the crystal. "Turn the hands backward," he instructed. I hesitated, fear and fascination battling inside me. But curiosity won. I grasped the tiny crown and slowly moved the hands counterclockwise. The ticking grew louder, deeper, until it filled the entire room, vibrating through the floor and into my chest. Suddenly, the shop dissolved around me. The air thickened, and the walls blurred like ripples on water. When my vision cleared, I was standing in the same spot, but the clockmaker's workshop was pristine. Not a speck of dust, the wood freshly polished, every clock gleaming. Outside the window, the city was different. Brighter, alive with the hum of voices, carriages, and horse hooves. The streets were busy with people dressed in fashions from decades ago. I was no longer in the present. I had traveled back in time. A cold shiver ran down my spine. From the shadows of the shop, the clockmaker's voice echoed, "Time is not a river that flows in one direction. It is a web, a tangle of threads, each moment woven into countless others. Pull on one, and the entire pattern shifts." I turned to ask him what he meant, but the room was empty. Instead, I saw my own reflection in the polished surface of a nearby clock. But it wasn't me exactly. Behind my reflection, a dark figure lurked, faceless, featureless, yet impossibly real. I blinked, and it was gone. For the next few hours, I wandered through the past city, trying to make sense of what had happened. The figure appeared again and again, always at the edge of my vision, never fully revealing itself. I noticed that people ignored it completely, as if it were invisible. It was like a guardian or a hunter. The clockmaker's warning replayed in my mind, "Some secrets are better left alone." I felt the weight of the watch heavy in my pocket, its pulse growing faster. Every so often, I found myself back in the shop, caught between moments, trapped in a limbo. I needed to return to my time, but when I tried to move the watch's hands forward, they refused. Panic set in. Then, one night, the shadowy figure confronted me. It stood silently in the middle of the shop, tall and imposing. I tried to speak, but no words came. The figure raised a hand, long, thin fingers reaching out, and suddenly the room twisted violently. Visions flooded my mind, moments from the past and future, lives intersecting, the delicate balance of cause and effect. I realized then that the figure was time's keeper, tasked with preserving the web. Tampering with time invited consequences. I had become a thread pulled too far. Summoning every ounce of will, I forced the watch's hands forward. The ticking crescendoed into a deafening roar. Then silence. I was back in the present, standing in the dusty, dim clock shop. The clockmaker gave a nod, his eyes grave. "Remember, some secrets are not gifts but curses." I left the shop that night with the watch ticking once again, a reminder that time is a fragile, dangerous thing. And sometimes it watches back. Story 14, The Reflection in Grandma's Mirror. I was 8 years old when I first saw her. Not a person I knew. Not a neighbor or friend. A woman who didn't belong. It was Thanksgiving. My family had gathered at my grandmother's old Victorian house, the kind with too many rooms and furniture that smelled like mothballs. After dinner, the adults stayed drinking in the dining room while his kids were sent upstairs to play. That's when I found the mirror. It stood at the end of the hallway, tall and oval, its frame carved with twisting vines and flowers. The glass was wavy with age, making everything in it look slightly wrong. I stopped to fix my hair, and that's when I saw her. A woman, standing behind me. Not in the hallway, only in the mirror. She was pale, her skin the color of old paper. Her dress was long and black, the kind people wore 100 years ago. Her hair hung in limp strands around her face. But her eyes were empty. Just dark holes where eyes should be. I spun around. Nothing. Just an empty hallway. When I looked back at the mirror, she was gone. I told my cousin Emily what I saw. She laughed and called me a baby. Then we both looked in the mirror. And the woman was back. Closer this time. Her mouth opened. No sound came out. 5 years later, we cleaned out Grandma's house after she passed. The mirror still hung in the hallway. I avoided it at first. But on the last day, something made me stop in front of it. The woman wasn't there. Instead, the reflection showed the hallway behind me. Except it wasn't my hallway. The wallpaper was different, older, peeling. The lights were dimmer. And at the far end, barely visible in the gloom, stood the woman, facing away from me. Her head tilted like she was listening. I reached out to touch the glass. It was warm. By the time I was in college, I'd learned she only appears in old mirrors, antique stores, flea markets, the dusty full-length mirror in my dorm's common room. She never looks at me directly, not at first. But each time, her reflection turns slightly more toward me. And the reflection is always wrong. The room behind me is never quite the real room. There's always one difference, a door that shouldn't be there, a window where there isn't one. Last month, I bought my first house. The previous owners left an ornate mirror in the master bedroom. I meant to get rid of it. But tonight, exhausted from unpacking, I caught my reflection as I got ready for bed. The room behind me in the mirror wasn't mine. The walls were darker. The air was hazy, like smoke. And the woman stood at the foot of my reflected bed, facing me. Her hollow has locked on mine. Her mouth moved. This time, I heard it. Almost home. I keep the mirror covered with a sheet. But sometimes, when I pass it too close, the fabric shifts. Just enough to see the edge of the glass. And the faint outline of her hand, pressing against the other side. Waiting. Story 15, the door at the end of the hall. I was 12 when I first noticed the extra door. Not in my childhood home. Not in any house I'd ever lived in. A door that couldn't be there. It was the summer my family moved into the old Craftsman on Willow Street. The house had that peculiar smell all old houses have, with polish and something faintly metallic, like old pipes. My bedroom was at the end of the upstairs hallway, right next to the linen closet. Except, on the second night, as I walked back from the bathroom, I counted the doors. Left side, my parents' room, the bathroom, my room. Right side, the linen closet. And one more. At the very end of the hall, where the wall should have met the corner of the house, stood a fifth door. I froze mid-step, my bare feet suddenly cold against the hardwood. The door was slightly ajar, revealing a sliver of darkness so complete it seemed to swallow the faint glow of the night light. I could make out the grain of the wood, dark oak, unlike the painted white of the other doors, and a tarnished brass knob that looked decades older than anything else in the house. I told myself I'd missed it before, that in the chaos of moving, I simply hadn't noticed. But even as I thought it, I knew that wasn't possible. I'd spent all afternoon arranging my new room. I'd walked this hallway a dozen times already. That door hadn't been there. "Mom?" I called, my voice thin in the dark. No answer. Just the creak of the house settling. I inched forward, one hand trailing along the wall for balance. The air grew colder with each step, until my breath came in visible puffs. When I was close enough to touch it, I realized two things. First, the door was freezing, like metal left out in winter. Second, I could hear breathing on the other side. Not mine. Something slower. Deeper. The rhythm of it was all wrong. Inhales too long, exhales too short, with a wet, clicking sound at the end of each breath. I ran. Back to my room, under the covers, where I stayed until sunlight turned my curtains gold. In the morning, the door was gone. I checked before breakfast, heart pounding. Just smooth wallpapered wall where it had been. When I asked my parents about extra rooms, my dad laughed and said the attic access was in the master closet. "Maybe you saw a shadow," my mom offered, pouring orange juice. New houses can play tricks at night. But that night, it returned. I sat in bed, watching through my cracked door as midnight came and went. At 1:17 a.m., the air in the hallway shimmered, like heat rising off pavement, and the door blurred into existence. This time, it was open wider. I could see part of the room beyond, peeling floral wallpaper, a warped hardwood floor, and the edge of what might have been a rocking chair. Moving. Ever so slightly. The breathing was louder now. I didn't sleep. By the third night, I developed a ritual. Check the hallway at dusk, always empty. Watch from bed as the door appeared after midnight. Note how much farther it opened each time. On Thursday, the gap showed the rocking chair clearly, its runners scraping faint grooves into the floor. On Friday, a pale hand rested on the armrest, fingers tapping an uneven rhythm. On Saturday, I saw the profile of a woman. She was tall, too tall, her neck elongated like a stretched photograph. Her hair hung in greasy strands, and her lips moved silently, as if rehearsing words. When she turned toward the hall, I saw why I'd never heard her speak. Her mouth was sewn shut with coarse black thread. I started sleeping with the lights on. It didn't help. The door still came, and the woman, the thing, began stepping into the hallway. First just a foot, then a leg. Last night, she stood fully in the hall, her head brushing the ceiling, stitches straining as her mouth worked behind them. I'm writing this at 3:47 a.m. She's at my door now. Not the bedroom door. The other one. The one that just appeared on my closet wall. It's opening. Story 16, The Last Stop. There's something unsettling about bus rides late at night. The world outside dissolves into darkness, and the usual hum of life fades to an eerie silence. I used to think it was just tiredness playing tricks on me, but what happened one night made me question everything I thought I knew. It was just past midnight when I caught the last bus home from the city. The streets were nearly empty, the street lamps flickering like hesitant beacons. The bus was half empty, maybe a dozen souls scattered in their seats, lost in their own worlds. I settled in near the back, watching the road through the rain-spattered window. The rhythmic thrum of the tires against the wet pavement was oddly soothing. Outside, everything was blurred, muted by the rain and darkness. As we rolled past familiar neighborhoods, a strange unease crept up my spine. I noticed a man get out at one of the stops, tall, in a long dark coat, face shadowed beneath a hood. He moved with a calm certainty, but there was something off. He didn't look around, didn't seem to notice the other passengers, as if he was somewhere else entirely. He sat 2 rows ahead of me, and I couldn't help but glance at him. His hands rested on his knees, fingers twitching nervously. The bus seemed to hold its breath. The bus pulled to the next stop, but no one got on. The driver didn't say anything, no one spoke. The rain was heavier now, drumming harder on the windows. The man in the coat suddenly turned his head toward me, though his eyes remained hidden in shadow. A chill ran through me. I tried to focus on my phone, but the screen flickered and died. The bus jolted slightly, then began moving again, but this time, the familiar street signs passed too quickly, as if we were moving faster than usual. Passengers started disappearing, one by one. At first, it was subtle. A woman I'd seen knitting moments ago was suddenly gone, leaving only a dropped scarf behind. Then the man next to her vanished, his seat empty, the air cold where he'd been. Panic started to rise inside me. I stood up, heart pounding, but the bus was quiet except for the driver's steady hands on the wheel. I looked back at the man in the coat. His head was now turned fully toward me. His voice was a rasp, barely a whisper. "This is the last stop," he said. I asked, "What do you mean? Where are we going?" He smiled, a cold, empty smile, and said, "Not where. When." The bus came to a halt at a stop I didn't recognize. The lights outside flickered and died. The doors opened with a groan. No one else moved. I stepped off. The world outside was blank, no street, no buildings, just endless blackness. The rain had stopped. A cold wind whispered across my skin, carrying voices I couldn't understand. I turned back. The bus was gone. Behind me, footsteps approached. I ran, but the shadows reached out. And I woke up the next morning, in my bed, drenched in sweat, the sound of rain still tapping on my window. But something was wrong. My coat was missing. And on my doorstep, a single black feather. Story 17, The Silence Beneath the Lake. There's a small town nestled between rolling hills and thick forests, where the mist clings to the ground like a shroud, and the lake, dark and still, seems to swallow the light itself. The locals call it Blackwater Lake. To outsiders, it's just another quiet spot on the map. But for those who live nearby, it holds secrets that whisper beneath the surface, waiting to be heard. I first heard about Blackwater Lake when I moved to the town for a fresh start. The people were friendly but wary when the topic came up. They'd speak in hushed tones, glancing toward the water as if afraid it might listen. At the edge of town, an old man named Samuel sat outside a weathered cabin, his eyes clouded yet sharp. He told me stories, not the kind you hear in books or movies, but stories you feel in your bones. "Never go near the lake after dark," he warned. "There's a silence there, a silence that's not empty. It's full of waiting." I thought it was superstition until I experienced it myself. One evening, curious and restless, I decided to walk to the lake just before sunset. The sky was painted in blood-red streaks, the air thick with the scent of damp earth and pine. As I approached, the water looked unnaturally still, like black glass reflecting a world I didn't belong to. The surface rippled faintly, though there was no breeze. I stood on the shore, watching the water, and then I heard it, a faint melody, barely audible, like a lullaby sung in a language I couldn't understand. It drifted up from beneath the lake. A cold shiver ran down my spine. That night, sleep eluded me. The lullaby haunted my dreams, pulling me back to the water's edge. Over the next days, I learned more about the lake's history. Decades ago, a young woman named Alara vanished without a trace while swimming there. Her disappearance was blamed on an accident, but locals whispered that something else took her, something beneath the water, something patient. Some claim to see her ghost drifting across the lake's surface, singing her silent song. One night, the melody returned, stronger and clearer. Compelled, I followed it through the woods to the lake. There, the surface shimmered and parted like a curtain, revealing a deep cavern below. From the darkness, eyes emerged, countless eyes, glowing faintly, watching. The water pulled at my feet, cold and demanding. I struggled but felt myself slipping, sinking toward the abyss. Then, a voice, soft, sorrowful, unmistakably Alara's, whispered, "Stay with me." I woke gasping, alone on the shore, dawn breaking. The lake was calm again, its secrets swallowed by daylight. But sometimes, when the wind is just right, I still hear the lullaby. And I wonder how many have answered the call, never to return. Story 18, The Lighthouse Keeper. There's a lighthouse standing alone at the edge of the world, battered by endless storms, its light a solitary beacon in the dark. To most, it's just a forgotten relic, a point on a map. But for those who have been there, the stories are far from ordinary. The lighthouse is said to be cursed, haunted by something ancient and restless. I first heard about the lighthouse from a friend who worked as a marine biologist. He told me about strange occurrences during his research trips, ships lost without a trace, radios crackling with ghostly voices, and lights flickering where there should be none. Curious and craving a story worth telling, I decided to visit. I arrived just as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with bruised purples and blood reds. The air was thick with salt and fog, and the only sound was the relentless crash of waves against jagged rocks. The lighthouse was taller than I expected, its white paint peeling like old skin. The door creaked as I pushed it open, revealing a spiraling staircase that seemed to vanish into darkness above. Inside, the smell of rust and damp would fill the air. I started climbing, each step echoing, as if the lighthouse itself were breathing. At the top, the light chamber was empty, no keeper, no equipment. Just the giant lens staring out into the void. Suddenly, the light flickered on, cutting through the fog. But there was no one there to turn it on. That night, I stayed in the small keeper's cottage nearby. The wind howled like a living thing, and the shadows inside danced with the storm's fury. Around midnight, I heard footsteps on the gravel outside, slow, deliberate. Peering through the window, I saw a figure walking toward the lighthouse. A man in an old-fashioned uniform, soaked and weather-beaten. He didn't notice me. He climbed the stairs and vanished inside. Unable to resist, I followed. The lighthouse stairs creaked under my weight, leading me up into a thick darkness. At the top, the figure stood by the light, staring out at the stormy sea. "Are you the keeper?" I asked. He turned slowly, pale, eyes glowing faintly with an unnatural light. "I am bound to this place," he said. Watching. Waiting. His voice was like the sea, deep, endless, and cold. He told me the story of the lighthouse, how generations of keepers had vanished, swallowed by the storm, trapped between worlds. He was the last, cursed to stay and tend the light forever, guiding ships away from the rocks but never free to leave. "The sea takes us," he said, "but the light remains." Suddenly, the room grew colder. The walls seemed to pulse, and the waves outside roared like a beast in pain. Then I heard it, a distant scream, muffled and desperate. The keeper's eyes darkened. "They come," he whispered. "The lost souls, the drowned. They try to claim the light." The lantern flickered violently, and shadows surged around us, swirling like a dark storm. I stumbled back, heart pounding, as ghostly hands reached out from the walls, trying to drag me in. I ran down the stairs, out into the tempest, lungs burning with cold air. The keeper's voice followed me, a haunting lament carried on the wind. I never looked back. The next day, the lighthouse stood silent, its light extinguished. And I wondered who would be the next keeper. Story 19, The Man in the Cornfield. They say the corn whispers at night. I used to think it was just the wind. But after what happened on my grandfather's farm, I don't think it's the wind anymore. I spent every summer as a kid at my grandfather's farm in rural Illinois. Acres of cornfield stretched in every direction, a golden sea that rustled and danced under the breeze. The days were long, the nights calm, peaceful, safe, until the year I turned 16. That summer, something changed. The corn grew thicker, taller, more suffocating. My grandfather, a hardened man who had survived wars and loss, began to act strangely. He'd wake up at night, pacing the porch with a loaded shotgun. He'd mumble about watching the rows and how he always comes back. At first, I thought he was just getting old, maybe dementia. Then I saw him too. It was past midnight, and I couldn't sleep. The moon hung low over the field, casting silver light over the rows of corn. I was staring out the window of my upstairs room when I noticed it. A man, standing motionless among the stalks. He was tall. His skin pale, stretched tightly over sharp cheekbones. He wore a brimmed hat and a dirty black coat that hung off his bony frame. His hands dangled at his sides, long-fingered and still. I watched, heart pounding, waiting for him to move. He didn't. The next morning, I told my grandfather. His face drained of color. "You saw him?" I nodded. He sat down, hands trembling. "That's the corn man. He comes when the field grows too thick. I've seen him since I was your age. Same hat, same eyes, same hunger." I waited for the punchline, but he looked dead serious. "I've lost 3 dogs to that thing. A cousin too. Disappeared right out there." He pointed toward the cornfield. "Mark my words. If you ever hear rustling and there's no wind, stay inside. Don't go looking." I listened for a while, but curiosity is a powerful thing. A few nights later, I heard it rustling outside my window. No wind, just the sound of corn shifting, parting. I looked out. There he was again, closer this time. The same brimmed hat, the same coat. But now, he was facing the house. He tilted his head slowly, like a predator tracking its prey. I backed away. The next morning, I walked out to the spot where he'd been. Nothing. Just corn. But as I turned to go back, I saw something on the ground, a button. Old, rusted, with a smudge of red on the rim. I showed it to my grandfather. His eyes widened. "That's his," he whispered. That night, we slept with the doors bolted and salt poured across every windowsill. But the corn man didn't need doors. At 3:17 a.m., I woke to the sound of footsteps downstairs. Slow, crunching, like boots on dry leaves. Then the creak of the stairs. I froze. The door to my room began to rattle. Then, silence. I sat there for hours, too scared to breathe. When dawn came, the door opened, slowly. My grandfather stood there, pale as ash. "He came again," he said. "He left something behind." We went outside. In the middle of the yard was a trail of footprints. Deep, barefoot, leading from the cornfield to the porch and then back. But in the middle of the path, laid neatly in the dirt, was my childhood photo. The one from 10 years ago. The one we lost. After that, my grandfather packed his things. He moved out of the farmhouse and never returned. The cornfield grew wild that year. No one harvested it. No one even walked near it. When I drove past it 5 years later, I saw something out of the corner of my eye. A tall figure standing at the edge of the field. Same hat. Same coat. Still waiting. Story 20, The Fifth Door. When I was a kid, my uncle used to tell me never to go into the basement of our family's ancestral home. There are 5 doors down there, he'd say, his voice low. But you only need to worry about 4. It's the 5th one that listens. I thought he was just trying to scare me. But now, I wish I'd listened. Because the 5th door listened too well. The house sat on the edge of a forgotten town in West Virginia, a crumbling relic from the 1800s. My great-grandfather built it himself, and every generation after him lived and died in it. When my parents passed, the house became mine. I was reluctant to move in at first, but something about the isolation felt right. I was tired of the noise, the city, the rush. I craved quiet. I should have known better. Quiet is never just quiet. The basement was made of stone, cold, damp, echoing. I found it during my first week in the house, hidden behind a warped wooden door under the stairwell. It smelled like mold and old memories. I counted them, 5 wooden doors, all lined up along one wall. Each one old, sealed with rusted hinges and keels black as pitch. Only the first 4 were labeled with faded metal tags. Storage, furnace, tools, preserves. The 5th door? Nothing. No tag. Just a dark, featureless slab of wood. No handle. Just a keyhole that seemed to absorb light. And I swear to you, as I stared at it, I felt it stare back. For weeks, strange things began happening. Voices. Low murmurs. Breathing sounds through the floorboards at night. Every time I passed the basement door, I felt cold air leak from behind it. But the furnace was upstairs. Sometimes, I'd wake up at 3:33 a.m. exactly to hear the faint creaking of hinges. I'd find the basement door open, though I'd locked it before bed. And always, that oppressive silence would follow. The kind that makes you feel like you're not alone. One night, I decided I'd had enough. I had to see what was behind the 5th door. I took my flashlight and crowbar and went down, each step heavier than the last. As I approached the 5th door, the air thickened. Like syrup. My flashlight dimmed, even with new batteries. The other 4 doors groaned softly, as if protesting. And the 5th door, it breathed. Not air, but space. Time. Sound. It pulled at me, like gravity. I forced the crowbar into the edge and pried it open. It shrieked like a wounded animal. Behind it? Nothing. No room. Just blackness. A vast, endless void. I tossed a wrench inside. I never heard it land. I leaned closer. A whisper grazed my ear. You opened it. I fell back, heart racing. The door began to creak wider on its own. I slammed it shut. But when I turned around, I wasn't in the basement anymore. I stood in a hallway, identical to my basement, but wrong. Warped. The walls breathed. The floor pulsed like flesh. The 4 doors were there, only now they bled rust, their labels scrawled in something red. The 5th door stood open behind me. And in the reflection of its darkness, I saw myself, only older, hollow-eyed, mouth open in a scream I hadn't made yet. I ran. No matter how far, I never reached the stairs. The hallway looped, endless. Voices whispered my name, my regrets, my sins, and the door was always behind me, waiting. When I finally awoke, if that's what it was, I was back in my bed. Morning sunlight warmed my room. Relieved, I went to the kitchen, only to find 4 chairs at the table, not 5. And the pictures on the walls, all my family members were missing one person. Me. I rushed to the basement. All 5 doors were sealed again. But this time, the 5th door had a tag. It read, "You." That night, I heard footsteps inside the walls. Not rats. Footsteps. Human. Pacing. And from behind the 5th door, a whisper. "One more step." I've lived in the house ever since, but I never go into the basement, because some nights when I pass that part of the house, the 5th door opens a crack, and inside I see myself older, emaciated, smiling. He beckons me in, and one day I fear I won't resist. Story 21, The House Guest. I'd been traveling for months, chasing sunsets and chasing silence. The city had grown too loud, too bright. So when I found the ad for a room in a quiet suburban home, I thought it was perfect, inexpensive, comfortable, with promises of peace. What I didn't know was that I wasn't the only one hoping for quiet. I arrived on a rainy evening, suitcase in hand. The house stood at the end of a cul-de-sac, modest, well-kept, humming with soft light. A cozy kind of place, really. Mrs. Henderson, the owner, greeted me with tea and a warm smile. Her husband, George, was quieter but just as welcoming. They had an empty room upstairs, they told me, perfect for a traveling writer. It was a small, bright room overlooking the backyard. I unpacked quickly, happy to be off the road. That night, I slept well. The house was silent but comforting. No more city sirens, no more traffic horns, just wind and rain. On the 2nd day, I settled into a routine. Wake late, drink coffee in the sunroom, work on my writing. Mrs. Henderson brought me fresh scones, George showed me the garden. They were friendly, but something felt fragile, like they were holding something back. That night, I heard it, the faintest sound outside my door. Not knocking, not whispering, but the gentle scrape of a chair being moved. I dismissed it as nothing. Probably the Hendersons tidying up late. Over the next few days, odd things happened. My favorite notebook disappeared, then reappeared, placed neatly back on my desk the next morning, flipped open to a blank page. I'd find the lights in the hallway turned off when I was certain I left them on. One night, I heard singing, faint, lullaby-like, drifting up the stairs. No one was awake, I was sure of it. I told myself I was imagining things. I was tired from travel. Then I found a guest book. It was tucked beneath a folder in the living room, a plain, leather-bound journal with years of entries. I flipped through, expecting names of travelers. Instead, each entry was dated months, years ago, but all from the same date, February 14th. Next to each date, a name and a note. Thank you for letting me stay. I'm so tired. This is my last night here. I don't know how much longer I can quiet the voices. No other dates. Only February 14th. No years. Just that date, over and over again. That night, February 14th, the house shifted. The air was heavy. The lights flickered. The Hendersons seemed quieter than usual, their eyes distant. I pulled the guest book off the shelf for a closer look. A new blank page had been added, labeled 2025, February 14. but no name yet. My name shouldn't have been there. I'd just arrived. Midnight came with a soft chime, the grandfather clock downstairs marking hours. I noticed the Hendersons had disappeared. I found them in the kitchen, sitting at the table, teacups in front of them, staring at empty chairs across from them. I asked, "Is everything okay?" Mrs. Henderson looked at me, sad. "You're not the only guest tonight." Her voice trembled. I followed her upstairs, heart pounding. She stopped outside my door, pointed to a shadow at the threshold. It was a person-shaped absence, dark, shapeless, too tall, too still. George stood behind her. "It's waiting." My pulse raced. The air felt impossibly cold. The shadow didn't speak, but I sensed it needed something. I heard voices, faint, begging, weary. The Hendersons lit candles and set them on the nightstand. "It wants to be company," Mrs. Henderson whispered. "We can't fight it. We've been waiting, too." It pressed forward into the room, folding into the corner. The Hendersons sat and closed their eyes, accepting. I didn't understand until I turned the page in the guest book. Right next to the 2025 date, scrawled hastily, was my name. My handwriting. I hadn't written it. Tears welled in my eyes as the room chilled beyond belief. I fled that night, suitcase in hand, leaving everything behind. The Hendersons? I don't know. The house? It's one of those abandoned memories I can't erase. But I keep seeing that date. Every year, I watch for February 14th. And I wonder who will be the next guest. Because some invitations you can't refuse. Story 22, The Eyes in the Wallpaper. There's something unsettling about things that are always there, especially when you stop noticing them, and then one day, you do. That was the case with the wallpaper in the old townhouse I inherited from my grandmother. It was a quiet place, tucked away at the end of Bramble Street. I hadn't been there since I was a child, and back then I'd always thought it felt heavy, like the air never moved. But memories fade, and when the keys landed in my hands, I convinced myself it was nothing more than an old house filled with character. The place was in rough shape. Peeling paint, sagging floorboards, a smell like dried flowers, and dust that clung to everything. I spent the first 2 days hauling out old furniture, scrubbing grime off the windows, and airing the rooms out. But it was on the third day that I noticed the wallpaper. Beneath layers of newer prints, patterns from the 80s and 90s, there was something much older, yellowed with age. I uncovered it while tearing off strips in the living room, revealing this faded, repeating design. At first, I thought it was just a floral pattern. But when I stepped back, I saw them eyes. Dozens. Hundreds. Tiny printed eyes. Each one slightly different. Some were wide and innocent. Others narrow, angry. Some looked frightened. And they were all staring directly out at me. It wasn't just unsettling. It was wrong. And yet, I couldn't look away. I called a friend over to show her. She laughed at first, said it was some Victorian pattern gone creepy. But as she kept staring, she went quiet. Then she said something odd. "These don't look printed," she whispered. "They look watched." We laughed it off. She left. But that night, around 2 a.m, I woke to the softest whisper of sound, like paper fluttering. My bedroom door creaked slightly open. I sat up, thinking maybe the draft from the hallway had done it. That's when I noticed it. One of the eyes, from the wallpaper in the hallway just outside my room, was glowing faintly, like it had caught some invisible light. I stared, frozen. It blinked. I shot out of bed, slammed the door shut, and stayed awake until sunrise. In the morning, I convinced myself it was just a shadow, or a trick of light. Maybe I had been more tired than I realized. But when I looked at that same strip of wallpaper again, that one particular had faded, like it had been rubbed or worn away. I hadn't touched it. Later that week, I started noticing other things. Whenever I sat in the living room, I felt like I was being watched. Not in that vague, paranoid way, no. This was concentrated, specific, like the stare of someone standing inches from your face but never speaking. The air grew colder at night. I'd wake up and hear soft tapping from the living room walls. The wallpaper began to peel on its own, curling at the edges like dead leaves. I left it, thinking I'd replace it later. But every time I tried to strip it completely, I'd get nauseous, physically sick. As soon as I'd tear off a strip, my head would pound and my stomach would turn like I'd swallowed ice water. I tried to paint over it. Just a simple primer coat. The moment I rolled the brush over the first eye, every light in the house flickered and died. Power outage. Or so I thought. The street lamps outside were still on. The brush had torn a thin layer of the paper, and beneath it, I swear to you, there was another eye. A different one. It had depth, not print. It looked real. Wet. Watching me. I stopped sleeping in the house after that. I'd stay with friends, pretend I was still renovating, but I avoided going back at night. Still, every time I tried to walk away completely, something would pull me back. The house was mine. The memories were tied to it. And there was a whisper inside my head, not a voice exactly, but a presence that told me, come back, finish it. So I did. One last time. I went alone, just before sunset, determined to rip the rest of the wallpaper off and be done with it. I brought gloves, a scraper, and heavy-duty trash bags. I blasted music on my phone just to drown out the silence. As I started tearing down more strips, I began to notice that behind the paper, there were names, written faintly in pencil. Dozens of them. First names only. Clara, Samuel, Beth. Names from different time periods. The handwriting varied, too, some shaky, others sharp and deliberate. I felt dizzy. I kept going. More names. More eyes. And then I found mine. My name. Written in perfect handwriting. Not like mine, but as if someone knew me. It was under a strip that hadn't been exposed until that very moment. Right above my number 743, yes, by then, I had counted. I fell back, hands shaking. That was when I heard it. A sound I'll never forget. Like paper breathing. A slow, in-out flutter, coming from every direction. The room itself sighed. I turned and saw the strips I had already torn, moving on the floor, curling inward like they wanted to wrap around me. I grabbed my bag, ran out of that house, and never looked back. I sold it to a property developer months later. Told him it needed work. Said nothing about the eyes. Sometimes I still dream of them. Always watching. Always waiting. And when I wake, I swear the walls of my apartment have shifted just slightly. Like they're hiding something. And on one of those nights, just once, I found a scrap of yellowed wallpaper by the foot of my bed. I never put it there. It had one eye. And it was open. Story 23, The Left Path. There's a park in my hometown, or rather, just outside of it, called Pine Brook Reserve. It's not the kind of park with swing sets or picnic tables. It's more of a sprawling forest preserve with unpaved trails, heavy woods, and a silence that settles on your skin like cold mist. I hadn't been back there in over 15 years, not since I was a teenager. And even then, it was only once. One time. I never talked about it afterward, not to my friends, not to my family, not even to myself in the quiet of my own thoughts. Some experiences you just seal away. But 2 months ago, I had to go back. It was my brother, Danny. He disappeared. Just vanished. His car was found on the edge of Pine Brook's entrance, engine off, driver's door open, keys still in the ignition. No signs of a struggle. No note. No blood. His phone was in the glove compartment, battery drained. The police searched for weeks. Dogs, drones, volunteers. Nothing. But I knew. Somewhere deep in the pit of my stomach, I knew where he'd gone. I hadn't told him about my own experience there. I hadn't warned him. And now, it was too late. Unless I went in. I waited until the search efforts calmed down. Then, one gray morning, with a thermos of coffee and a flashlight, I parked my car exactly where his had been found. It was early. The mist hadn't burned off yet. The air smelled like damp leaves and wet stone. Pine Brook has 2 trails. Most people know only one, the well-marked path that winds in a wide loop and leads back after a few miles. But there's another. Hidden. The left path. It's not labeled. In fact, it barely looks like a path at all. You find it by stepping through a break in the undergrowth near the old oak tree with 3 white X's carved into its bark. That's how I found it the first time. That's how I found it again. The moment I stepped onto it, the air changed. It wasn't colder. It was thicker. Like it carried weight. The trees leaned closer together here, as if they'd grown toward the trail deliberately, forming a kind of tunnel. I walked slowly. Each step seemed to echo louder than it should have. Birds didn't sing here. No squirrels rustled leaves. It was a silence that didn't feel empty, it felt full. Like something was listening. About 20 minutes in, I saw the first marker, a hanging charm. A small bundle of twigs, bound in red thread, dangling from a branch overhead. I remembered it. It had been there before. Exactly the same. Untouched by weather. Untouched by time. Another 20 minutes, and the trees began to change. They weren't just leaning anymore. They were warped. Twisted unnaturally. Their bark peeled in strange patterns, almost like symbols. And the forest floor was scattered with odd things, feathers tied with black string, broken doll heads, teeth. Yes. Teeth. I tried not to panic. I kept walking. But the further I went, the more I felt disconnected. The forest didn't feel like Earth anymore. It felt like a forgotten place, stitched into our world like a mistake. Then, I heard it. Soft footsteps behind me. Just 1 or 2 at first. Then nothing. I froze. Turned. Nothing there. But I could feel it. That presence. Like something just beyond the veil of reality. I should have run. I know that now. But I pressed forward. Eventually, I reached a clearing I remembered all too well. It was circular, the trees bending outward now, like something had exploded in the center and forced them away. And there it was. The tree. It didn't look like the others. It was jet black. Not from burning, it looked grown that way. Its bark was glossy, like obsidian, and its limbs twisted into arcs that resembled claws. The ground beneath it was dry, bone dry, even though the rest of the forest was soaked from days of rain. At the base of that tree was a door. Yes, a literal door, wooden and arched, built into the base like it was part of the tree itself. No frame, no hinges, no reason. I remembered that door from 15 years ago. I remembered it opening, and I remembered what I saw inside. This time, though, it was already slightly ajar. I don't know what came over me, but I pushed it open further. The inside was pitch black, but not the natural kind of dark. It was like looking into something that had never seen light, that had no concept of it. And from inside, I heard a voice. Not my brother's. Not a voice at all, really. A feeling. You came back. That's all it said. I felt something crawl up my spine, not a bug, but cold. Ancient cold. Like touching the bottom of a frozen lake. And then, from the darkness, something stepped forward. I can't describe it. I won't. Not because I'm scared, but because I can't. My brain still won't let me hold its shape, its face, its sound. All I can say is, it smiled. Not with a mouth. But it smiled. And behind it, I saw Danny. His eyes. Just his eyes. Floating in the dark. Blinking. I ran. I don't remember the path back. I just ran. Somehow, I emerged from the forest 2 hours later, covered in scratches, mud in my teeth, my clothes torn. Danny was declared dead last week. But I know where he is. And some nights, when the wind is just right, I hear the trees whispering outside my apartment window, in a voice that isn't mine and isn't human, asking, "Will you take the left path again?" And someday, I might. Story 24, the bedroom door never closes. When I was 10 years old, I had a bedroom at the very end of a long hallway. It was the kind of hallway that always felt colder than the rest of the house, even during summer. The lights above it flickered more often than they should have, but my parents said it was bad wiring. I always slept with the door slightly open. Not because I was scared, but because it wouldn't close. Even when I tried. Even when I pushed it hard and twisted the old brass knob. 10 minutes later, it would creak back open, just a few inches. Just enough to see the hallway again. Just enough to let it see me. I told my parents, of course. They humored me at first. My dad even replaced the hinges. Still, the door opened. Eventually, they just chalked it up to the house being old. I stopped telling them about it after the third night I saw something standing in the hallway through that barely cracked door. It was tall. Too tall. Its head almost brushed the ceiling. But it didn't move. Just stood there. Like it was waiting. I tried to scream, but nothing came out. I could feel its attention. Not eyes, just its awareness pressing on me like a weight. And then, it would be gone. I'd blink, and the hallway would be empty again. I started sleeping with the covers pulled over my head. It felt like the only safe place left in the world. I stopped watching TV at night. Stopped reading scary books. Stopped asking questions. But the door never stopped opening. When I turned 16, we moved. A bigger house. Nicer neighborhood. My parents joked that I'd finally have a bedroom without a haunted door. I laughed with them. I wanted to believe it was just imagination. And for a while, everything was normal. Until the door in my new room started to open by itself, too. Not much. Just a crack. But it was enough. Enough for me to know it followed me. I don't think it ever lived in the house. It lives in doorways. In thresholds. It waits where one place becomes another. It waits in the in-between. That's why I started sleeping with the door fully shut and a chair jammed underneath the knob. But every few weeks, I'd wake up and find the chair tipped over. The door open. Just a few inches. Just enough. By college, I was done pretending it wasn't real. I rented a studio apartment with no interior doors. I kept salt by the windows and mirrors covered. I stopped dating. I didn't want to bring anyone into this. I figured as long as I didn't invite it in, I was safe. But fear doesn't stop monsters. One night, I came home late. I was dead tired. Dropped my bag, kicked off my shoes, fell into bed. My studio didn't even have a bedroom door, just an open frame. So I slept easy that night. Until I heard it creak. A door hinge. Slow. Rusty. I bolted upright. There was no door. I knew that. I saw the empty frame with my own eyes. But the sound came again. And then, impossibly, the space where the frame had been was filled with a door. Old wood. Brass knob. The same door from my childhood. Standing upright. No hinges. No wall. Just a door. And it was opening. From the other side, cold poured in. My breath fogged. The room dimmed. It was as if light itself avoided that gap. And then, I saw it. The tall thing. Except now, it wasn't still. It leaned forward, just slightly. As if curious. As if testing me. And it whispered something I still hear in my nightmares. The door is never the problem. You are. Then it vanished. The door was gone. My studio was normal again. But now, every night, even without a door, I hear creaking. In my walls. In my dreams. In the back of my mind. I moved again. I moved 6 more times, actually. Different states. Different buildings. I even tried living in a houseboat once, no doors at all, just curtains. But somehow, it always finds a way in. It doesn't need a door. It just needs the idea of one. And once you've seen it, once you've let it see you, you carry that door with you. Wherever you go. Story 25, The Hands Beneath the Floorboards. When I moved into the cabin, it wasn't out of excitement or adventure, it was out of desperation. A recent breakup, a job that dissolved overnight, and an overwhelming need to disappear had led me to that forgotten property in the Pacific Northwest. It sat at the edge of a forest so dense that even during daylight hours, the sunlight barely reached the soil. The listing described it as rustic, charming, and perfect for solitude. I should have known that was code for uninhabitable, but at the time, solitude sounded like salvation. The first night was quiet. Too quiet, in fact. You don't realize how noisy the world is until you leave it behind, until the hum of refrigerators, distant cars, and street lights are replaced by sheer, oppressive stillness. That first night, I lay in bed and heard nothing. But by the third night, I heard scratching. At first, it was faint. I figured it was a raccoon or something in the crawl space. Old place, old wood, normal. But it got louder. And closer. What bothered me wasn't the sound itself, but the pattern. It wasn't random scuffling. It was deliberate. Scratch, scratch, pause. Scratch, scratch, pause. Like someone testing the boards. Listening. Then came the knocks. 3. Always 3. Soft, but perfectly spaced. like knuckles on wood beneath my bed. I checked underneath. Nothing. I pulled up a few boards with a crowbar. Just dirt. I even sprinkled flour on the floor one night to see if something small was crawling around. Nothing. But the knocking never stopped. It became part of the rhythm of the house. Then, one night, something new happened. I woke up to the sound of breathing. Not mine. Not close, but beneath me. Deep, slow, shuddering breaths. Like lungs that hadn't drawn air in years. I froze in bed, heart pounding, sweat trickling down my spine. Then, the floor creaked under my feet. As if something was rising. The boards didn't move. But the sound, it was unmistakable. And then, fingers. Long, skeletal, pale fingers, curled up through the cracks. They didn't push hard, just enough to be seen. Enough for me to know they were there. I screamed. I jumped out of bed and bolted out of the house. Slept in my car till dawn. I told a local, a bearded man who ran the only gas station for 20 miles, and he just stared at me. Then he asked, "Is that the red cabin? The one past the logging road?" I nodded. He sucked in air through his teeth. "Yeah, that place has a reputation. They say it was built over a sinkhole. Something collapsed underneath 100 years ago. Took people with it. Whole family. But their bodies were never found." I tried to brush it off. A local legend. An old wives' tale. Until I went back to the cabin and found the floorboards rearranged. Yes, rearranged. As if something had moved them. Or someone. Not ripped up, not broken. Just subtly wrong. A seam that was once vertical now ran at an angle. A nail that was flush now stuck out slightly, bent. As if something had come up and didn't put them back quite right. And then, I started seeing them. Not the hands. Faces. Reflections in the window glass. Not my reflection. Theirs. Children. An old woman. A man with no jaw. They never moved. Just stared. Like they were waiting. I left again. This time for good. But sometimes, even now, years later, I hear them. 3 knocks. Always 3. No matter where I sleep. No matter what floor I'm on. 3 knocks. And breathing just beneath me.